Hi, everybody. This is Jim Skelly, and this is the Global Conversation. It's the 10th of the mini lectures for the current semester. I know that many of you are deeply engaged in some of the issues that we've been looking at. Let me give you some positive things today, as well as the usual worrying things, shall we say. First, let me tell you some technical issues. One, I noticed that a couple of the learning circles, especially the one on population and energy resources, seems to be slowing down a bit. Now is actually not the time to slow down. You should be engaged more than ever in the learning circle activities. So those of you in those learning circles, please come together, somebody takes some leadership, and let's see if we can't pull together a final project. I'll be posting the final essay for those of you who need to take the final essay for academic credit this semester. I should be posting that this week. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that the Lester Brown book, which is called Plan B 4.0, is available at Lester Brown's website at the Earth Institute. We have a link to it at the course website. It's downloadable for free, so and it's downloadable in various languages too. So take a look, and if anybody's having difficulty finding it, drop me a note and I'll put you on to it directly. Couple of things, other things I want to talk about. We're now entering that section of the semester where we're talking about the future. And we want to end this course over the next several weeks on a positive note. There are some positive developments in the world. One of them is that because of the economic slowdown, we actually have had a drop in CO2 emissions, believe it or not. It's really quite extraordinary, actually. Global emissions overall have dropped by 1.3%. It's still the second highest in human history, which is not good. But it's interesting to see what countries have dropped in emissions. One is the United States, of course, which is down by 6.9%. The United Kingdom by 8.6%. Japan by 11.8%. However, China increased its CO2 emissions by 8%, India by 6.2%, and even South Korea by 1.4%. The worrying thing, and there's a very interesting article on the Huffington Post about the worry that carbon emissions are not the only thing we need to be worried about. We need to be worried. I mean, CO2 emissions, we need to be worried as well about the methane. And there's a very interesting article titled Siberia's Climate Time Bomb, and the worry that the permafrost in Siberia, when it melts, will release methane, or methane as they say in the United States, which is 23 times more powerful as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So you want to think about that. There are going to be climate meetings. Again, the United Nations convening a group in Cancun, New Mexico, in about another week's time, but it's not looking that promising. So it may be time to really think about what action you might take, because what's happening is that as the permafrost melts in Siberia, more and more things are starting to become problematic. There's a little story about a Russian scientist who shuffles across a frozen lake, and with a cigarette lighter in one hand, a knife in the other, he taps through the ice and lights the vapors that are coming out of the ice, and it flashes because it's all methane gas. So take a look. Think about what this means. Okay, more positive things, however. We're talking this week about empathy. And if you look at the current theme in the course, the current theme in the course is theme number 12, and there's a video lecture with Jane Goodall, who worked with great apes in Africa. That's called Reasons for Hope. There's another one called The Empathic Civilization, which is about an hour-long lecture and talk by Jeremy Rivkin, who's just written a large book about this. But there's also an animated short based on Rivkin's lecture that may be more accessible to some of you. So I take a look at that one before I take a look at the others. If I was a student, that's what I would do, okay? Rivkin makes an interesting argument, and it's one that we've been trying to pay attention to here, which is that our empathy is the characteristic of humans that we really need to highlight. And I've just finished, so this is what he talks about in The Empathic Civilization. He talks about how we might create greater empathy. And that requires, of course, some structural transformation. But take a look at his work. I was just reading an absolutely fascinating, and I mean fascinating, article about a new book that's out called The Great Penguin Rescue. I don't know if any of you have heard of this. It's by a scientist by the name of Dyan DeNapoli, who has been working as a penguin expert for the Boston Aquarium in Massachusetts, in the United States. And the Great Penguin Rescue is about a disaster that occurred off the coast of South Africa. And thousands, tens of thousands of penguins, African penguins, were affected by this oil spill from a ship called the MV Treasure, of all things. What you had is when she arrives in Cape Town as part of an effort to save the penguins, she goes into a rescue center, an enormous warehouse in the center of Cape Town, where she finds 16,000 soiled, mute, and traumatized African penguins, each of which would require many weeks of rehabilitation to sort out. And this was a worse disaster for seabirds than the Gulf oil spill, because they weren't nesting at the time. And to understand this a bit more, I hadn't understood this as well as I do now until I read this article, and I'll send you a link to it. Penguins and other seabirds are particularly vulnerable to oil spills. Fish may be attracted to the floating oil slicks, and schools of fish inevitably attract penguins as well as other seabirds and seals. When these air-breathing creatures, like penguins, attempt to feed on the fish, they have to enter the slick, and so they become oiled. And the penguin breeding season at the time of the Treasure disaster in June 2000 was in full swing. And the shores of the islands around where it sank were, as they say, thick with fluffy chicks. Within about a week, about 20,000 birds had become soiled with oil. Even a spot of oil, they say, the size of a small coin, spells inevitable death for a penguin, for it destroys the feather's waterproofing, allowing freezing water to come into contact with the bird's down, the soft feathers, and its skin. Oiled birds, apparently, have just two options: stay at sea and die of hypothermia, or come to land and slowly starve. Thankfully, most birds came to land in this case, and they were therefore easier to rescue. The amazing thing was the enormous amounts of people who came to participate in this rescue. And what you saw were, businessmen, women with coiffed hair, beautifully manicured nails. The whole range of people came out to help save these penguins. One of the people was a remarkable woman named Dyan DeNapoli. She was one of the first people to arrive and initially worked converting the warehouse into a penguin rescue center. For weeks, she would arrive home from the center at 4 a.m., take an hour or two of sleep, and head back to work by 6 a.m. Competent and reliable, she was soon nominated as section leader, responsible for several hundred penguins and for training new volunteers. However, she collapsed from dehydration, and it was then discovered that she was just 14 years old. Isn't that extraordinary? A girl of that age, just so motivated by empathy for other species. Absolutely fantastic. One of the things that's particularly troubling in this story is that they had to decide whether they would save the chicks, the babies, or the adults. They decided that, the adults could breed again, but the chicks particularly vulnerable anyhow. One of the people was a woman named Lauren Dubois, and she was responsible for examining each box of chicks as it was brought in and culling the small and weak. When she returned to her job as a penguin chick raiser at a California aquarium, she had great difficulty adjusting because she couldn't find anybody who would understand what she had been through. And she was haunted. Her nights were haunted by dreams of penguin chicks looking imploringly up at her as she was forced to flush them down the toilet. That's our dependence on oil. That's what it brings about. So the book, Dyan DeNapoli has now become known as the Penguin Lady. I will give you a link to her website and to some other information about penguins for those of you who might be interested in penguins or just interested in other species. One other thing to tell you about, and that is the Weather at Home project. Now, what's starting to happen is that they're trying to correlate the links between global warming and extreme weather events. And you can sign up using your computer to help run climate models. I'll send you information about this, but it's a massive international effort run by the Meteorological Office in Great Britain and a group called ClimatePrediction.net, which is the world's largest climate forecasting experiment. So that's all I have really for this week. I hope you'll get busy with the Learning Circle projects, and I will send you a number of links. I think you'll find Dyan DeNapoli's story quite interesting. Might make a very nice Christmas present for somebody, he thought. So you might find some friends. I think you'd all enjoy reading the book as well. Okay, I'll talk to you in the next week or so. All the best.